He discovered a new world, but died believing he'd failed. He was celebrated as a hero, then arrested, and sent home in chains as a criminal. This is the true, complicated story of Christopher Columbus. To make sure you don't miss more surprising stories from history that will help you master English, subscribe and turn on all notifications so you are the first to know when our next story is live. Every day I try to bring you stories that are fascinating, exciting, and easy to understand. They are made to help you improve your English and learn about our world. Today's story is about a man who changed the world forever. His name was Christopher Columbus. For some people, he is a great hero, a brave explorer who connected different parts of our world. For other people, he is a villain, a man who brought great pain and destruction. But who was he really? What is the true story? This is not just a history lesson. It is an adventure. It is a journey back in time. And this story is perfect for your English learning because I will explain everything in a simple and clear way. Even if you are just starting to learn English, I promise you will be able to follow along. So find a comfortable place, relax, and let's begin. Christopher Columbus was born in the year 1451. He was born in the city of Genoa, which is in the country we now call Italy. But at that time, Italy was not one single country. It was made of many smaller city-states, and Genoa was one of the most important ports in all of Europe. Columbus came from a simple family. His father, Domenico Colombo, was a wool merchant, and his mother, Susanna Fontanarosa, was a weaver. They worked very hard, but they were not a rich family. They did their best to give their children a good life. Even as a young boy, you could see that Christopher was a little different from the other children in Genoa. While his friends played games in the narrow city streets, Columbus dreamed of the sea. He loved to go down to the busy port and just watch the big ships. He saw them coming and going, carrying wonderful things like spices, silk, and gold from faraway lands. He would spend hours there, listening to the sailors' stories about the great unknown world that was beyond the ocean. But there was a problem. Columbus was not from a rich or noble family. In those days, only wealthy men could become captains or explorers. So how did the son of a wool merchant become one of the most famous explorers in all of history? The answer is simple, but not easy. He was curious, he was determined, and he never, ever gave up on his dream. Even though his family did not have much money, Columbus had a very sharp mind. He knew he needed to learn. He studied cartography, which is the art of making maps. He studied mathematics and astronomy, learning about the stars. He even taught himself to speak and read Latin. He did this because all the important books about geography and sailing were written in Latin. When he was only 14 years old, he had his first chance to work on a ship. It was a dangerous life. The sea was full of pirates and ships from enemy cities. But Columbus felt alive. He loved every moment of it. For him, the ocean felt like his true home. For the next 10 years, he sailed all across the Mediterranean Sea. He learned everything he could about ships and navigation. And during this time, a crazy idea started to grow in his mind. What if he thought there was a faster way to get to Asia? In the 1400s, trade with Asia was very, very important for Europe. Spices, silk, and gold from countries like India and China were worth a lot of money. But getting there was incredibly difficult. The land route called the Silk Road was long and dangerous, and it was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, which made it very expensive. The other way was to sail by sea, but that meant going all the way around the huge continent of Africa. It was a very, very long journey. Columbus had a bold and simple idea. What if he sailed west across the great Atlantic Ocean to reach Asia? He knew the Earth was round. So he thought if I just keep sailing west, I must eventually reach the other side. It sounded logical to him. But there was a very big problem. Nobody believed him. Most people at that time thought the Atlantic Ocean was simply too big to cross. It was a place of mystery and fear. Some people even believed there were giant sea monsters hiding in the deep water, waiting to swallow ships. Others believed that if a ship sailed too far, it would simply fall off the edge of the world. But Columbus was a determined man. He needed money ships and a crew to test his idea. For years, he traveled to the courts of different kings and queens, asking them for their support. He first went to the King of Portugal, but the king said no. Then he went to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. At first, they also said no. But Columbus did not give up. He spent 6 long years trying to convince the Spanish rulers. He explained his plan over and over. He told them that if his plan worked, Spain would become the richest and most powerful country in the world. Finally, they agreed. On August 3, 1492, Christopher Columbus and his crew set sail from the port of Palos de la Frontera in Spain. The journey ahead was filled with mystery, danger, and hope. He had a fleet of 3 ships, the Niña, which was small but fast, the Pinta, a strong and quick ship, and the Santa Maria, which was the largest ship, but also the slowest. Columbus was confident. He truly believed that in just a few weeks he would be in Asia. The truth, of course, was that he was sailing into a world no European had ever seen. At the beginning of the voyage, everything was perfect. The sea was calm, and the wind was strong, pushing the ships forward. The men were excited. They sang songs and told stories. They all dreamed of the gold and riches they would find in Asia. But soon the good feelings began to fade. The wind, which had been their friend, suddenly changed. It became weak, and the ships began to move very, very slowly. A deep quiet fell over the crew. The men grew restless. Many of them had never been so far away from land. They looked out at the empty, endless ocean, and fear began to grow in their hearts. The food and water were limited, and the salty sea air made them thirsty all the time. As the days turned into weeks, that fear turned into quiet panic. The sailors started to whisper to each other. "What if Columbus is wrong?" they would say. "What if we never find land? What if we sail too far and can never return?" Some of them remembered the old stories, the myths about giant sea monsters that lived in the ocean. By September 10, 1492, more than a month had passed since they had seen land. They had sailed for thousands of miles, but every morning they woke up to the same sight: water. Only water. The sailors started to lose hope. Some of them went to Columbus and demanded that they turn the ships around and go back to Spain. Others started to whisper about a mutiny, about throwing Columbus into the sea and taking control of the ships themselves. A few men, grown men, and experienced sailors began to cry. They truly believed they would die in the middle of this endless ocean. Columbus knew he had to stay calm. He understood that if he showed any fear, the crew would lose all their trust in him. So he tried to give them hope. He told them stories about the great treasures that were waiting for them. He promised them again and again that land was very near. He ordered his men to look for signs of land: a floating leaf, a bird in the sky, a different color in the water. Still, the men grew more and more impatient. They wanted proof. Then, on the dark night of October 11th, something changed. A sailor named Rodrigo de Triana was high up on the mast of the Pinta, looking out into the darkness. Suddenly he shouted, "Tierra! Tierra! Land! Land!" Everyone rushed onto the decks of the ships. They stared into the distance, and there it was, a dark line on the horizon. It was land. Tears of joy filled the eyes of the sailors. They laughed, they hugged each other, and some knelt down on the wooden deck to pray and give thanks. On the morning of October 12, 1492, Columbus and his men got into small boats and rowed to the shore. They stepped onto a beautiful island in what we now call the Bahamas. They were in a new world, but they did not know it. They still believed they were somewhere near Asia. The island was stunning. It was full of green forests, the water was clear and blue, and the beaches were made of golden sand. Soon, Columbus saw people. These were the Taíno people, the native people of the Caribbean. They had dark skin and long black hair. They wore simple clothes made from cotton. They came to the beach, and they welcomed Columbus and his men with smiles. They brought gifts of fresh fruit, colorful parrots, and handmade objects. Columbus believed he had reached the islands near India, so he called these people Indians. The Taíno people had never seen anything like these visitors. They had never seen giant wooden ships with white sails or men with pale skin dressed in metal armor and carrying swords. They were amazed. At first, they thought Columbus and his men were gods who had come down from the sky. The first meeting was peaceful, but soon things would begin to change forever. After staying on the island for a few days, Columbus continued his journey. He sailed around the area and discovered more islands, including the large island of Cuba, which he thought was China, and the island of Hispaniola, which today is shared by Haiti and the Dominican Republic. On Hispaniola, he found what he was looking for. The Taíno people there wore small gold ornaments. When Columbus saw this gold, he became obsessed. He believed there must be huge amounts of gold somewhere on that island. But then Columbus had a big problem. His largest ship, the Santa Maria, hit some rocks and crashed on the coast. It was destroyed. Now he could not take all of his men back to Spain on the two small ships, so he decided to leave 39 of his men behind. They built a small settlement, a fort, and called it La Navidad, which means Christmas in Spanish. He promised them, "I will return with more ships and more men. We will build a great colony here." Then he and the rest of his crew set sail for Spain. The journey back home was very dangerous. They sailed into terrible storms with huge waves. The men were afraid they would never make it home. But finally, in March of 1493, Columbus arrived back in Spain. He was treated like a true hero. When he walked through the streets, people cheered his name. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella welcomed him to their court like a great warrior. He showed them the things he had brought back: small amounts of gold, strange and exotic fruits, and colorful parrots. He had even brought a few Taíno people with him to prove to everyone that he had found a new land with new people. The Spanish king and queen were amazed. They immediately gave Columbus more ships, more men, and more money. He had won their trust completely. But what nobody knew at that time was that his next voyage would change history forever, and not in a good way. Before we continue, let's learn a little about his personal life. Christopher Columbus was not just an explorer. He was also a husband and a father. He had married a Portuguese noblewoman named Filipa Moniz Perestrello, and they had a son together named Diego. Sadly, Filipa died when she was still young, leaving Columbus to raise their son. Later, Columbus had a relationship with a Spanish woman named Beatriz Enriquez de Arana. They were not married, but they had a son named Ferdinand, who later in his life wrote a book about his famous father. So after that first famous voyage, Columbus was a hero in Spain. He had promised the king and queen gold land and new territories. Now they wanted more. They gave him a huge fleet of 17 ships. This time, he had over 200 men with him, including soldiers, priests, and farmers. He also brought animals like horses, pigs, and cows. In September 1493, Columbus set sail again. This was very different from the first voyage. He was not just exploring anymore. He was going to build a Spanish empire. After a long journey, they finally arrived back at the island of Hispaniola, at the place where he had left his men at the settlement of La Navidad. But as they got closer, Columbus felt that something was wrong. The settlement was gone. It had been burned to the ground. There were no Spanish men left, only silent, empty ruins. What had happened? Columbus soon learned the shocking truth. His men, the ones he had left behind, had treated the Taíno people very badly. They had stolen their food, they had taken their women, and they had been violent. Eventually, the gentle Taíno people had fought back. They attacked the fort and killed all the Spaniards. This was the first great conflict between the Europeans and the native people of the Americas, and it was only the beginning. Columbus was angry and determined to take control. He decided to build a new, much larger colony called Isabella, and he made himself the governor. He began to force the Taíno people to work for the Spanish. He ordered them to find gold and bring it to him. He started taking their land for Spain. The Taíno people soon realized that Columbus and his men were not just visitors. They wanted to take over everything. Tension grew, and some Taíno groups fought back. But Columbus and his men had swords armor and guns. They used their power and their weapons to control the people. This was the start of European colonization in the Americas. And here we see a change in Columbus. He is no longer just an explorer searching for a new route to Asia. He is now a governor, a ruler. I want to pause for a moment and ask you, what do you think was going through his mind at this moment? Was it anger? Was it fear of failure in front of his king and queen? If you were in his position so far from home with so much pressure on you, what would you have done? It's a difficult question, I know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. By the year 1498, Columbus had made 2 voyages, but back in Spain, people were starting to have doubts about him. They had been promised huge amounts of gold, but they were not getting rich as fast as they had hoped. Some of the Spanish settlers who had gone to the New World hated Columbus's rule. They sent letters back to Spain saying he was a harsh and cruel governor. But Columbus was still determined. He returned to the Caribbean for a 3rd time with 6 more ships. On this voyage, he found something new and very important. He sailed further south and discovered the coast of the South American mainland. He was the first European to see the land that is now Venezuela. But his problems were only getting bigger. In the year 1500, the Spanish king and queen sent a special investigator to the colony to check on Columbus. They had heard too many bad reports. People said Columbus was unfair and that his punishments were too cruel. When the investigator arrived, he saw that many Spanish settlers had rebelled against Columbus. After listening to all the complaints, the investigator made a shocking decision. He arrested Christopher Columbus. He had Columbus put in chains and sent him back to Spain as a prisoner. It was a terrible fall for a man who just a few years before had been celebrated as the greatest hero in Spain. Can you imagine that the great admiral of the ocean sea, the hero of Spain, being sent home in chains like a common criminal? It's a powerful image, isn't it? His story doesn't end here, though. He has one more journey to make, perhaps the most difficult and desperate one of all. To make sure you join us for the final part of his life and for other stories that show the surprising turns of history, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. It really helps us continue to bring these stories to you. Now, even though Columbus had been arrested, the king and queen later forgave him. In 1502, they allowed him to make one final 4th voyage. But this journey was the hardest of all. His ships were old, and they were damaged in terrible storms. He and his men were tired and sick. At one point, he was stranded on the island of Jamaica for a whole year just waiting for help to arrive. By 1504, Columbus returned to Spain for the last time. He was an old man now, sick and very tired. The world had moved on. Spain was now more interested in other younger explorers. Columbus never got the great riches he had dreamed of. Christopher Columbus died on May 20th, 1506, in Spain. He was about 55 years old. In his life, he had made 4 incredible voyages across the Atlantic Ocean. He had discovered lands unknown to Europeans, he had met new people, and he had changed history forever. But in his final days, Columbus was not a happy man. He was sick, weak, and felt that he had been forgotten. He never got the great title he always wanted, the governor of the New World. And he never even knew the true importance of his discovery. He died still believing that he had reached the coast of Asia. Even though Columbus was gone, his discoveries changed the world. After his voyages, Spain sent many more explorers to the New World. They found huge amounts of gold and silver. This treasure made Spain one of the richest and most powerful countries in Europe. Spanish cities were built, and the Spanish language and culture spread all across the Americas. Columbus's dream had started a global revolution. A few years after Columbus died, a German mapmaker created a new map of the world. He named the new continent America. He named it after another explorer, Amerigo Vespucci. Amerigo Vespucci had also traveled to the new lands, and he was the one who realized they were not part of Asia, but an entirely new continent. Columbus had opened the door, but he never knew the name of the room he had entered. His voyages connected 2 parts of the world that had never met. But this connection also brought terrible pain and suffering to many people. The Taíno people who had welcomed Columbus with smiles were forced into slavery. New diseases brought by the Europeans like smallpox killed millions of indigenous people who had no immunity. European conquerors took their land and their power. This is why today people still argue about the legacy of Christopher Columbus. Some say he was a hero. They say he was brave. He proved that long ocean voyages were possible, and he opened the way for global trade and exploration. Others say he was a villain. They say he stole land from the native people, he treated the Taíno with great cruelty, and he brought slavery and destruction to the New World. The truth is, history is complicated. Columbus was not a perfect man. He was ambitious. He was incredibly brave, and he was determined. But he was also harsh and at times ruthless. His story shows us that a person can be more than one thing at the same time. Today, Columbus is remembered in many ways. There is a Columbus Day, celebrated in the United States and some other countries. There are cities, rivers, and even a country, Colombia, named after him. But many people now protest this celebration. They say the day should be called Indigenous Peoples Day, to remember the native people who suffered and lost so much. No matter how we see him, one thing is clear. The journey of Christopher Columbus changed the map of the world forever, and that's where our story concludes. This one was a real journey, wasn't it? It's a story with so many different sides to it. I am so curious to hear your take on it all. What were your final thoughts? Do you have any lingering questions about why a character did what they did? Please leave all your opinions, your theories, and your questions in the comments below. I truly love reading them and building this conversation with all of you. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in our next story.